Welcome to Black Gems Unearthed. I'm Jazz and I'm learning Black history around Massachusetts. And today I'm back in the North End, but this time hanging out with Paul Revere. I imagine you know about him, right? From the whole midnight ride of Paul Revere, aka that one time Paul had to ride off on his horse and let John Hancock and Samuel Adams know that the British were coming to arrest them and grab all the ammunition, which led to the first battles in the American Revolution. Yeah, that Paul Revere. So I'm here, and while I like that poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, I really like the letter that Paul Revere himself wrote to historian Jeremy Belknap, because in it is an itty-bitty black gem that I'm going to unearth today and tease it out so that we can understand more Black history here in Massachusetts. It's a dark history, so get ready for what I have to say. So Paul writes in his letter that he leaves Boston, gets ready to go, puts his boots on, heads over to the Charles River where a couple of guys meet him in a boat. And they row that boat across the river to Charlestown. In Charlestown, a couple of guys know what's going down. They must have seen the lanterns flickering in the church. And so they're ready to meet Paul. They chit-chat for a little bit, and then they give him a horse so that he can go off on his mission. So Paul rode his horse up to the Charlestown Common, which correlates to this part of Somerville today, right around the Holiday Inn. You'll see behind me that there is a little Paul Revere, because when he came up here, this is where he had to make a turning point, because he saw a couple of British officers, and he wrote in his letter that he got nearly opposite where Mark hung in chains when he saw two people on horseback under a tree. So he quickly turned and galloped off toward Medford Road. The hold up. Did y'all catch that black gem I just dropped? Maybe I should walk that sentence back a little slower. He said that he got nearly opposite where Mark hung in chains. That is the black gem that I need to talk about today. Mark was a black man that was executed, and his body hung in a gibbet, which is like a cage that a body is hung in. And so his body hung here across from where this Paul Revere statue is. His body hung for decades here. That's why Paul and other people reference him as a common landmark. As common as if I was to say, to get to my house, you have to pass by the house that never removes its Christmas decorations, or the one with the hot pink flamingos. So why was Mark executed? What's his story? I think we need to know. So to tell that story, we're gonna head over to Cambridge. In September of 1755, Mark Codman was executed for the crime of murdering his enslaver here in Cambridge. He was hung on the gallows of Cambridge that was on the Cambridge Commons, which I learned from the Cambridge Historical Commission that the gallows were located in this area, kind of near Lesley University. Like you see all those restaurants back there. If you go back down that little corner street, that is like the general area where the gallows once stood. There used to be a sign, but we can't have any nice things because people kept stealing the signs. So now there are no signs. Therefore, I have to stand here and tell you that this is where Mark was hung. We know a little bit of Mark's story and what exactly happened with this crime of murder, thanks to the trial notes, and because Mark's last dying words were published in a newspaper. I think it was the Boston Post. So I'm going to pull up a chair. I think I'm actually going to go down to the Commons to tell you what happened with Mark and that history. So Mark, he was a blacksmith, a husband, and a father. And according to his dying words, he was born around 1725 in Barbados. And he was brought to Boston at a young age to work as a slave labor. So his story is similar to other black folks that ended up in Boston and Massachusetts at the time. A lot of them were brought from the Caribbean plantations because up here in the north, there were a lot of people that were merchants and they had connections to the plantations. So they'd be like, yo, send us the sugar and also like throw a couple of enslaved people on the ship so that I can have them work my estate or do other labor around the colony. So Mark was not unique in how he ended up here. In his dying words, he says that he had a few different enslavers in his lifetime that were decent enough. One even taught him how to read. But then there was John Codman. He was enslaved to John Codman, who lived over in Charlestown, and he was a retired ship captain who had a lot of enslaved people. And he doesn't sound to be as nice as other enslavers. At least there was one incident where he severely beat one of his enslaved people to the point that he had permanent damage in one of his eyes. So that whole myth that slavery in the North was benevolent that we hear in history textbooks, not correct. So Mark, along with two other women, one Phyllis and one other person named Phoebe, were John Codman's most entrusted enslaved workers, but they turned on him. First, there was the fire of 1749, where John Codman's blacksmith shop and another workspace were burned to the ground. Now, Mark said he had nothing to do with this. He was sick in bed. He was not involved at all. That's what he said in his dying words. And then he proceeded to narc on Phoebe and Phyllis. That ain't cool. But I guess when you're about to be executed, you might just say anything and everything. But yeah, he threw Phoebe and Phyllis right out there and said that Phoebe was the one that prepared the coals, and that Phyllis, she was the one that took the coals and, put them in position to light the two buildings up. However, the trial notes, Phyllis said that Mark was involved with preparing some material that would catch on fire quickly so that the buildings would burn down. So hard to know who was telling the truth, but those buildings did burn up. So in addition to the fires, there was also the poison. Mark seems to be the one who came up with the plan to poison John Codman. He decided that this would be the best method to get rid of him because poison wouldn't exactly break the rules of the Bible because they would not be violently putting their hands on John. Mark also decided upon the poison because there was another person who was enslaved, evidently, that got away with poisoning their master or their enslaver, someone named Mr. Salmon, which I find that interesting. There's Mr. Salmon, there's Mr. Codman, there seems to be a lot of fish last names, was there a tilapia in the house, a Mr. Swordfish, how many different fish names do people have back in the 1700s? So Mark was able to get some poison from other enslaved people in the colony. He had a friend, Robin, that was enslaved to a Dr. Clark, so he was able to get poison from him. He didn't really let Robin know what the poison was for. According to the trial notes, it sounds like he was just like, yo, Robin, I need this poison to get rid of these pigs. And Robin was like, okay, cool, and gave him the poison. But in fact, Mark took that poison, gave it to Phoebe and Phyllis, and they were responsible for stirring it in to John's porridge and also into his beverages. They got caught. I'm still not 100% clear on how they got caught. I mean, I did read through the trial notes and saw a mention about Molly, the mistress, that noticed lead in the porridge, but I don't know if that's what set things off or if it was something else. So if I find out, I'll put it in the description of the video. But they got caught and they got severely punished. Mark was executed by hanging and his body was tarred, and then he was hung in that gibbet that stood in Charlestown as a warning to other black people that had thoughts about trying to escape their enslavement by murdering their enslaver. And then Phyllis, she also was executed in even more, well, I don't know if I want to say even more, but she was also executed in a gruesome fashion. She was burned at the stake. And then Phoebe, it sounds like she was sent to go work in the Caribbean on a plantation. All three were punished in very harsh ways. And it's just so harsh that Mark was hung for so long. Wasn't executing him enough? And in light of their punishment, I just also wonder what was going through their minds that they thought that trying to murder their enslaver was better than being enslaved. And I can give you a little bit of insight. As I mentioned earlier, Mark was a husband and a father. And John Codman allowed him to live in Boston with his family so long as he sent his earnings back to John. And actually that setup was pretty common, that black people could go live where they preferred, so long as they sent their earnings back to their enslaver. But It appears that in 1748, Mark was forced to return to Charlestown and he was not able to live with his wife anymore. And on top of that, John decided to sell Mark's child. So this was very upsetting, I'm sure you could imagine. Mark asked John if he could also sell him off to, I assume, the same enslaver, or just sell him off so that he would be able to return to the city to live with his wife, and John refused. This could have been because of the fee that enslavers had to pay to emancipate their enslaved person. It's unclear what the reason was, but just imagine how upset Mark must have felt that he was separated from his family. And who knows whether or not he ever saw his child again, or if and when he saw his wife. So I imagine being separated from your family, being forced into labor, in addition to being forced to work for someone that had violent tendencies. This is a lot. This is a lot for someone to have to live through. And this could have been what pushed Mark to the extreme of first setting the fire to that house, which he denied doing, and then ending up poisoning his enslaver. Now, whenever I think about the midnight ride of Paul Revere, I can't help but think about Mark Codman, whose body hung in that gibbet in the Charlestown Common as the American Revolution began. As the Patriots took up their arms to fight Britain to get their freedom and independence, I think about how Mark fought for his independence by murdering his enslaver and the consequence, and how he hung there in chains as the Patriots fought for their freedom. Just doesn't sit right. It doesn't sit right. The Patriots were far from perfect, and I think it's important to be able to see that, to see how they treated Black people, and also how they treated Indigenous people in their pursuit of their own country. Whew, that's heavy. I think that's all I got to say. I have my sources in the description of the video, so you can read further and continue to learn about Mark Codman and this history. And I'll add more information as I find it too. For now, I gotta go look for something delicious to eat, because this is a rough topic. Until next time. All right, I have arrived at the destination, the Little Crepe. It's been on my radar for a very long time. They obviously make crepes and other items, and it's owned by people of color, so gotta support when you can. I decided to get the salmon crepe. I think I'm still thinking about fish from earlier from all those people. But I also got this really nice tea too. This place was incredibly delicious. I ate that crepe way too fast, so I ordered additional ones to go. And this tea is giving me so much life. Yeah, I highly recommend coming to visit this place. Love it.